Today, we kind of knock on the door of one of those gatherings, except the door isn't closed. It's partway open already. And we knock on that door, and no one comes to the door, so we go in, and we step into the middle of something that is very tense. There's this woman that is pouring out perfume on Jesus' feet. Very intimate, very unusual. And in some versions, she's also pouring out her tears there. And if that's not enough, suddenly there's this guy across the table crossing his arms, scolding, telling them that they could have sold that perfume and cared for a family for a year. It was so expensive, and it was a foolish thing to do. And what were they thinking? And his tone was clearly, there's something wrong with you, and that wasn't just for the woman, it was for Jesus too, because Jesus wasn't doing anything to put the woman, so to speak, in her place. And Jesus returns fire with, leave her alone. And the implication is, leave me alone too. And if there's any doubt that that was the implication, in just a few days, it becomes clear how seriously and how personally Jesus takes this moment of assault in that household. Because suddenly his disciples are gathered with him, and he doesn't have the expensive perfume, but he has water and a basin and a towel, and he too kneels at his disciples' feet and begins this intimate task of washing them, and telling them that they had to do the same for one another, to learn to give that kind of love and to receive that kind of love if they wanted to be part of his way. Back when my son was in first or second grade, my wife and I went in for the first parent-teacher conference that year. We went to visit the music teacher and then to visit the Phi Ed teacher, and then it was time to visit his main teacher. And we sat down, we visited a bit, and she was showing us some of the work he did and such. And then she said, you know, and he excels at math, but that should be no surprise to you. Well, that kind of perked our ears up. Shelley's degree is in visual arts. I'm a pastor, that's not exactly a math thing. She said, that should be no surprise to you with all you've done. And we just sat there still, perplexed a bit. And then she began to tell us that, well, at least I was an engineer. And I had been in Russia. And she even told me the town. And in China. And she even told me the project. My son liked Discovery Channel, it turned out. And he memorized the things on there. And when it was time to tell about what your parents did, a pastor was kind of an embarrassing thing in his mind. So he decided that day that I was an engineer. And he began to spin his tale. We had to disappoint her. I guess we didn't have to, but she was going to find out sooner or later. We had the next room over. The teacher there went to our church. She was going to find out. When Judas gets loud, and he tells the room full of people that the perfume could have been sold and the money used for the poor, what Judas is saying isn't true, but it reveals a truth. He was a bit of a crooked treasure, the Bible says. And his heart wasn't in the right place. And his last name is scary. It does mean dagger bearer. I almost wish that the Bible wouldn't have named Judas. That they wouldn't have told us who it was that scolded the woman and Jesus. Because the truth is, sometimes we think, oh, that's Judas. That's not us. But that's not the thing that I want us to think about this morning. Because I'm not sure it was just Judas. Listen closely to the exchange between the woman and Jesus, and Judas and Jesus. One is saying, thank you. The other is saying, you should, or you shouldn't. One is actually doing something for another person. The other is simply telling others what they should be doing. One is actually seeing the poor in Jesus, somehow tapping into his mood and what's going to be going on in the days ahead. The other is actually talking about poverty, but actually kind of talking about, poor me, why aren't people listening to me, and how I think this all should unfold in Jesus' life. One is simply living in a single moment to love and to be loved, trusting God. And the other is still trying with all his might to call the shots, not even trusting that Jesus knows what he's doing. One is first acting in love and later counting the cost. The other is only counting the cost and will soon betray Jesus for the right cost. One is humbly bowing. The other is haughtily scolding. Scolding not only full-grown adults gathered there, but scolding God, as it were. One is a bearer of radical generosity and hospitality. The other bears judgment and correction. And it leads me to ask, what am I the bearer of some days? Am I kneeling at the feet of others? Or am I scolding through frowns? In the midst of it all, before Jesus comes to the point of actually kneeling before his disciples and serving them with towel and basin, Jesus says some powerful words. He says, not only has this woman anointed me for my burial, he says, the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. And I began thinking, if they had Jesus right in front of them, and it was a 50-50 shot whether they got it right or wrong, one gets it right, one gets it wrong, what chance do we have when Jesus isn't right in front of us of getting it right? And how will we know if we're getting it right? How will we know if we're actually learning to live and love like Jesus? One person put it this way, thinking about the rapid growth of the first century church. He said the first century church had a healing first, food first, caring first attitude. Rules, ideas, theological discussion were secondary to caring for people. A little over a week ago, and some of you heard this yesterday, but some of you didn't, I was visiting with May Offit. She was still in the hospital then, and grew tired pretty quickly in our visit, and I asked if she'd like a word of prayer. And she said, yes, that would be nice. And then she said, but this hospital is big, and it is filled with people who are sick. They need our prayers too. I asked her if she wanted prayers, and she took that prayer time, and then she said, I want to share that prayer time, as it were, with the others who need prayers as well. Confined to her chair, she led us to be thinking about those beyond the room we're in. She led us not only to think of the poor, as it were, in a way that they were out there, but in a way where she was willing to share her time and to share her prayer with them. At 96 years old, it was radical hospitality, to the best of her ability to confine to that chair. And then when the prayer finished, she said what she always said to me when I visited, thank you and come by again. Again, radical hospitality and gratefulness. Thank you, and you're always welcome here. Biologically, within a few days, her heart failed. But spiritually, her heart of faith and caring was beating strong. Even as she was letting go of this life and would have had worries of her own, she was thinking of others beyond herself. How are our hearts beating today? Are they beating with the rhythm of radical hospitality?